Hey guys, welcome to CraterMania. I'm your host, the man they call Crater. I'd like to welcome you all back to the 500 movies in 2025 here on YouTube, and also welcome back to the Halloween Hoedown, where we're celebrating all those Halloween themed movies all October long. And if you're keeping up, it's no longer October. We're at November 2nd now, and a lot of that's my fault because I got a little bit behind. I was doing other things. Well, not exactly my fault. I mean, I just had like real life happen. Sometimes you just kind of, reschedule things, unfortunately. And also, I was supposed to have done this stream last night, but I've just been having some computer problems for like the past day and a half now. Just now kind of got that sorted out. So I'm like, all right, so I can go ahead and finally do the stream. Um, and for tonight's episode, this will be movies 382 through 389 of the 500 movies in 2025. So before I get into tonight's show, and tonight is a very special show for the Halloween Hoedown, where we will be talking about the Halloween franchise from 1978 up until 2002. And so starting with the original, going all the way to Halloween Resurrection. So before I get into that, on the last stream, I told you guys what was going on with me that day. We went trick or treating and everything, um, and then there was one thing I forgot to that I did leave out that I was going to talk about. I'll talk about that in just a moment, but I guess I'll tell you guys what went on with me yesterday. So yesterday, even though it was November the 1st, here in the area where I live, they had trick or treat last night. But instead of actually going trick or treating this year, in our town, my son Noah decided that he wanted to give out candy this year, and ever since we've lived in this house, we haven't given out candy one time. So we didn't really know what to expect. I was like, okay. So me and him sat out there. We had two different bowls of candy, for the kids to come and get and whatever. Um, so honestly, just where we had never done it before, and where we live, like right along this main road, we didn't know if anyone was going to stop or not. So I didn't really have high hopes for that, to be honest with you. But we ended up having around 12 kids, and I know that's still nothing. Some compared to some towns out there that kids go trick or treating to. Like, so I know like one of my friends lives up in Ohio. She said that she had around like 200 kids this year that showed up for candy. The town that we went to on Friday night in Jackson, just go trick or treating, which we had never been there before. We never took the kids there before, but like I have a friend that I work with, and she lives over there, and she told me about where they do trick or treat stuff over there because she was going to be giving out candy and all that. Um, so like, and there was a ton of kids. There was a ton of people at there on Friday night. And I mean, I was didn't count obviously who I was there, how many was there, but there was just a ton of people. And I remember asking my friend like later that night when I got home, I was like, how many trick or treaters did you guys end up getting? And she said that they counted like it was like 570 some kids. And I was like, that's an insane number, but I believe the amount of people that we seen there Friday night, I definitely believe it. Definitely believe that that would be the accurate number. But yeah, but when we gave out candy last night at the house, we got 12 kids all together, and I know that's a very extremely low number, but it was higher than what I was expecting. I honestly didn't really expect anyone to stop by the house at all. And we live in a very small town anyway. I mean, we're definitely, no matter where we're at in town, we're not going to get 500 trick or treaters at the at any of the houses here in this area. But but it's surprising because Jackson is an even smaller town than Hazard, and just for them to get that amount, close to 600 kids, is insane. It's really insane. But we had a lot of, despite just getting such a low amount of people, we were really surprised that, that many did stop by. And we had a lot of fun doing it. Me and Noah just sitting out there and just conversing and listening to music. I was playing some AFI and some Misfits and the Cramps and a bunch of different stuff. While the kids were coming by and getting candy and all that, and me, I was just letting Noah listen to new music as well to try to get him like interested, and because he's slowly, kind of gaining interest in a lot of bands that both me and Candace like, and kind of like, we play that stuff for him, and he's oh, I really like this song. What is this? So I love that he's kind of like taking a lot of those personal music interests that me and Candace have, and he's adapting to his own taste. So yeah, just a lot of fun, just sitting there, having on trick or treat night over here. But the other thing I was going to talk about, and I can't believe I forgot to talk about this on the last stream, but this past Wednesday, October 29th, me and Candace went to a screening over in Floyd County at the Mountain Arts Center of the 1925 Lon Chaney, The Phantom of the Opera. And it was really cool just seeing that on a big screen there at the Mountain Arts Center. And the even cooler thing was that there was two guys up on stage on the side of the screen that orchestrated all of the musical pieces throughout the film that are live on the stage. And it was so awesome. It was one of the coolest things that me and Candace have ever been to. I know Candace said this was one of her favorite things that she's ever experienced. And it really was cool. And it was just like $5 a piece to go in there and watch it. And I mean, it wasn't a very big crowd there, which is kind of upsetting, really disappointing to me, because, it's a dying appreciation from a lot of people when it comes to that sort of thing, and just, more and more people, and not just, events like that, but just the theater in general. You see less and less people attending movie theaters, and they just want to stay at home and do streaming and video on demand and all that stuff with these new movies. And that's fine too. That's fine. I'm like that with some cases, but I still love going to the movie theater and theaters and movie screenings, and just having that shared experience with other people that, appreciate that just as much as I do. So, but yeah, it was just a very, very cool thing to have. It was, and I think the event, they call it Fear at the Berg or something. They do this every year there over in Prestonsburg, Kentucky at the Mountain Arts Center. And like this year, they had 3 movies they played on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday night. So Wednesday, the one we went to was the Phantom of the Opera. And then on Thursday, they played The Howling. And on Friday, they played the original 1978 Halloween, which makes it a good segue into tonight's show, because as I said, tonight's show is about the Halloween franchise from 1978 to 2002. So the original film up until Halloween Resurrection. And this is a very special franchise for a lot of horror fans, for a lot of slasher fans, for a lot of Halloween enthusiasts, for a lot of Jamie Lee Curtis fans, John Carpenter fans. There is fandom surrounding this franchise all across the board. And it's one of the greatest horror movie franchises of all time. The original film, one of the greatest horror films of all time. And, what is it now? Over 4 decades, the Halloween franchise has been just this towering presence, in the whole horror landscape. It's a testament just to that enduring power of this masked killer that's stalking the night, and all these innocent bystanders, from the groundbreaking inception in 1978, to the early 2000s. With this is a specific era, of this whole Halloween saga that really just captivated this generation of horror fans, and it really forged just a deep and lasting connection. And I think, for tonight's episode, this is going to be my love letter to that period, from that original, cinematic masterpiece, through, the often misunderstood entries that would follow, up into, including the surprisingly, although, divisive Halloween Resurrection. And we'll get into all of that, and just as a devoted fan, you know, I have, dissected these films over the years. I've celebrated them, and yes, I've defended a lot of these films. And now it was this week. It was time to revisit just the magic and the madness of Michael Myers from 1978 to 2002. And to discuss the Halloween franchise is obviously to begin with its undeniable masterpiece, John Carpenter's Halloween. This film was released in 1978, and this film is not just a cornerstone of the slasher genre. It's basically the blueprint of it all. Its influence is so pervasive that it's easy to forget how truly revolutionary that it was. I mean, from the opening sequence with young Michael Myers, the point of view, the first person shot, it's just a masterstroke of just kind of this unsettling dread. And if I'm not mistaken, those hands that you see of the young Michael Myers, those are Deborah Hill's hands. Um, and just, that stark, almost like sterile suburban setting, kind of bathed in these muted tones of just that like autumn like twilight. It just really becomes a character in itself. And John Carpenter, alongside co-writer and producer Deborah Hill, they understood that true horror often lies in just that kind of mundane, that made terrifying. And they took the familiar, like a quiet street, babysitter alone at home, and just injected it with this kind of inexplicable pure evil. And the brilliance of Halloween really lies in the simplicity of it all. So Michael Myers isn't a complex character with elaborate motivations. He's pure, just unadulterated evil. His mask is eternally impassive. It renders him this kind of blank slate onto which our deepest fears can be projected. And Nick Castle's portrayal, combined with, John Carpenter's direction, it really creates this figure of just this unsettling stillness and just terrifyingly, efficient, movement. Thus the shape. So that deliberate pacing and just that use of like negative space and just that, that iconic score by, Carpenter himself, just that pulsating, theme, like dun 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 dun. It all contributes to this kind of atmosphere of just mounting tension that is just rarely matched. And what elevates Halloween, beyond just a mere like ghost story or whatever, is just that it's grounding in reality. At least initially. The whole final girl theme, just personified by Jamie Lee Curtis's, Laurie Strode, is just introduced with this kind of relatable vulnerability and intelligence. And, she's not like a gratuitous, victim. She's resourceful and brave, and just her struggle for survival really feels earned. You know what I mean? And then, of course, Donald Pleasance's Dr. Sam Loomis. He's the obsessive psychiatrist on Michael's trail. He's been dealing with him for 15 years. It just adds this kind of layer of, of urgency. His almost kind of like manic, dedication to stopping Michael, fueled by his understanding of just this evil that he has unleashed. It really provides like this really crucial counterpoint, to Michael's, silent and determined pursuit. And then you have the film's ending, with, Michael disappearing after being shot and falling out this window. it's just a perfect cliffhanger. Just it leaves the audience with this visceral sense of unease that he's still out there. And Halloween is just a masterclass in suspense. A film that proves that what you don't see is often far more terrifying than what you do. And I have had the pleasure of meeting several people from this film, including Jamie Lee Curtis and PJ Souls and Nancy Loomis and Charles Cyphers. And I've met, what's the guy's name? Brian Andrews that played Tommy Doyle, um, among others. And just absolutely one of my favorite horror franchises of all time. One of my favorite slashers of all time, the original Halloween. Um, if you have not seen the original Halloween, where have you been? What rock have you been living under? I mean, if you're a horror fan, if you're a Halloween fan, not the movie, but just the Halloween, the spirit of Halloween, um, why would you have not? How have you not seen, as popular as it is, how have you not seen the original Halloween? As popular as just the franchise is, as Michael Myers is. I mean, I can tell you there are kids out there that's probably never even seen a single Halloween film, but they will still know who Michael Myers is. And a lot of that has to do with like the internet and Roblox and whatever else, that generation is into now. Like my son, for example, he knew, like, from a very young age, before even seeing any movies, he knew who Michael Myers was. He knew who Freddy Krueger was. He knew who Jason Voorhees was. And just because they have just went outside that whole horror, that realm of horror, and they, characters like that have become these pop culture just phenomenons. And it's really like shocking to me when I hear someone, especially if it's someone close to my age, like say, "Oh, I've never seen Halloween," and I'm like, "What?" Especially if they're a horror fan, you know what I mean? Like it's crazy, but like if you've never seen it, you know, no judgment. Just no judgment here. Just go watch it and please experience one of the greatest films ever made. Um, but moving on now to Halloween 2 from 1981. Many sequels struggle to recapture, the magic of their predecessors. But Halloween 2, directed by Rick Rosenthal and produced by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, manages to build upon, the original's foundation with this surprising, amount of success for its time. And it picks up, immediately after the events of the first film, so it plunges everybody, the audience, right back into that night of terror. This it takes place the same night as the original film, and just this kind of those sterile, quiet suburban streets are replaced by the echoing, fluorescent lit corridors of Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. And while I think I do love the original more than Halloween 2, like Halloween 2 is right up there with it, and because just it's absolutely terrifying to me that majority of this film takes place inside of a hospital. A hospital is supposed to be a place where we are supposed to feel safe. We can go there if we're ill, or something's going on with us, and they're there to take care of us. The last thing you want to think of is going to a hospital, and just being terrorized by this deranged serial killer. I mean, that's what absolutely makes Halloween 2 so terrifying to me. It's also a setting that really offers new avenues for suspense and even claustrophobia. So the with this film, excuse me. So with this film, the biggest revelation is that Laurie Strode and Michael Myers are brother and sister. It's a controversial one too that kind of Amongst a lot of fans, they don't really care for that, but I mean, I think it's pretty cool, and I just think it fundamentally alters the mythology of the whole story between Michael and Laurie. And while some might see it, as a cheap retcon or whatever, it really injects this kind of personal element, into Michael's seemingly random rampage. And a lot of people don't like that. They think that just him stalking Lori and her friends and all that, was just supposed to be seen as this like psychopath, choosing these random victims, and they didn't want to have any kind of personal connection between them. But I like it. I think it's cool. The whole family connection. It's however twisted. It really just provides this kind of grim logic to just his pursuit of Lori. And this revelation, also explains why Michael, was so fixated on her. Like I said, some people don't like that. That's fine. But to me, I think it just adds that kind of layer of tragedy to her ordeal. And Halloween 2, it ups the ante in terms of gore, which is a clear nod to just the evolving slasher genre of the early 80s. Here the kills are more explicit and brutal, and they showcase Michael's increased ruthlessness. And in this one, Dick Warlock steps into the mask, and while he doesn't possess Nick Castle's specific subtle menace, in my opinion, Dick Warlock still brings a terrifying physicality to the role. And I always love the look of the mask in this one as well. And I've met Dick Warlock as well, and he's a super cool. He's one of the coolest people that you'll ever meet when it comes to conventions, and such a nice guy. And I remember meeting him. The first time I ever met him was actually in Pikeville, Kentucky, at a convention my friend Goose had put on called Darkwoods Con. And man, he absolutely just took his time with me. He took several photos, had these big long conversation. Such a cool guy, and I love him. But getting back to the film though, like I said, the film, it really effectively utilizes just the hospital setting, with Michael lurking in the shadows, and just appearing in these unexpected places, and using medical equipment as just instruments of terror, I guess. And Donald Pleasance is once again just a standout here as Dr. Loomis. His desperation escalating as he's racing against time to protect Lori and in Michael's spree of madness here. So his dialogues, just in this one, just crackle with this kind of profound understanding, of the darkness that he's up against. And the film's ending, which I said, this pretty much almost the entire film is set within the hospital. It really creates this frantic and just terrifying, crescendo, I guess, if you will. So while the explosion, Michael's fiery demise might seem final, that lingering uncertainty, just that final shot of Michael seemingly still alive, just perfectly sets the stage for future installments. Even if the path taken would prove to be a convoluted one, Halloween 2, despite its deviations from the original subtle horror, it really remains just a strong sequel that that respects its predecessor while kind of forging its own bloodier identity. And I think I remember John Carpenter talking about how this was supposed to be in the end of Michael Myers. So after Halloween 2, there was never supposed to be another film involving the character of Michael Myers. And John Carpenter wanted to go forward with the Halloween franchise as just kind of these other stories that would take place on Halloween night. And they wouldn't all exist within like one universe or anything. And that's how we got this next film, which is Halloween 3, Season of the Witch from 1982. And with Halloween 3, this film, and this is my favorite. This is my favorite Halloween film. by far, and a lot of people will like scoff at that or be or gasp at that or whatever, because it doesn't involve Michael Myers. But to be fair, the films are not called Michael Myers; they're called Halloween. And like I said, John Carpenter initially wanted this to be the deal. Like, Michael Myers' story would be told in the first two films of Halloween. Then going forward, every other story would be different, based around something happening on Halloween night. And I loved that concept. And I love the whole concept of this film. You know, it is definitely my most beloved Halloween film. Now, John Carpenter and Deborah Hill's decision, to pivot away from Michael Myers and and explore this kind of anthology like format. Um, and I will say this, it was a very bold, um, in retrospect, kind of a misunderstood move. And like I said, like a lot of people don't really care for Halloween. Well, they didn't, but now I've noticed over the past few years that Halloween 3 is kind of getting an even bigger and bigger following. And I don't really know what happened, but I know there's a lot of people that just despise this movie for years, and some people still do. Joe Bob Briggs being one of them. But, you know, like I said, it was just, I think it was a very misunderstood move, and I would have loved to see what could have been, with all the films that would follow Halloween 3. But as you know, that didn't happen, and the popularity and the money and everything, with the filmmakers and the studios, wanted to bring Michael Myers back. But we'll get into that just a bit. But let's talk about Halloween 3. So this film was directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. It's a fascinating piece of 80s horror that just stands entirely on its own merits. Um, even if it feels like an anomaly, within the Halloween canon. Um, the film's plot, which is centered around this kind of sinister plot by the Silver Shamrock Novelties Company to murder children on Halloween night using these enchanted masks, is just wonderfully bizarre and uniquely creepy, I think. It really taps into that commercialization of Halloween and just that inherent vulnerability of children, during the holiday. And Dr. Dan Chalice, played by the amazing Tom Atkins, such a wonderful character actor. He's this womanizing doctor, caught in a conspiracy, and then you have Ellie Grimm, played by Stacey Nelkin, who's the daughter of this murdered mask shop owner, and they kind of form this very compelling, although somewhat cynical duo, to try to, they team up to try to figure out what's going on here. And what makes Halloween 3, I think, so compelling, in my opinion, is just that distinct atmosphere and that kind of thematic resonance that it brings. It's less about the slasher and more about folk horror and that kind of cosmic horror. And the town of Santa Mira, California, it really feels like a character in itself. It has this very eerie tranquility about it that really masks this kind of deeply disturbing secret, and this the Celtic connection to Samhain, or Samhain, however you want to pronounce it. I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Samhain though. But anyway, it's this ancient harvest festival from which Halloween derives its name, and it's explored in this movie with this kind of genuine sense of mystery and danger. um and Tom Atkins, he delivers a fantastic performance as the reluctant hero here. Just he has that very world weary like cynicism that slowly gives way to this desperate fight against this overwhelming evil. And Daniel Hurley, as Connell Cochran, the mastermind behind Silver Shamrock, is delightfully villainous here. And I mean, he has this very calm, cool, and collective personality about him, just a very chilling charisma. And the film's ending, with this kind of relentless countdown to the broadcast of Silver Shamrock's, deadly commercial, like 8 more days till Halloween, Halloween. If everybody has seen Halloween 3, they know that song. They know that song by heart. So it really creates this very huge sense of urgency. So the imagery, of children's heads melting and transforming into insects and snakes and whatever creature else, that's coming out of these kids' heads from wearing these masks is just very disturbing and unforgettable. And like I said, it was a very bold move to target children, and especially during this time, 1982. It was, and there may be a lot of people out there that don't like it for that. And if you've heard me talk about it before, I don't really care, too much about films that have a premise where they're like, kids are getting killed and stuff. But Halloween 3 is kind of an exception because it just has just a phenomenal story, and it's definitely disturbing at times and absolutely unforgettable. I think it's a testament to that film's willingness to just push boundaries, especially in that time of day back in 1982. And while Halloween 3, it may not feature the mass killer Michael Myers that fans had come to expect when the announcement of Halloween 3 was made back all those years ago. It offers this very different, arguably, more insidious form of horror. It's a film that just reveals in the darker, more mystical aspects of Halloween. The involving the witchcraft from which the whole Halloween like idea was formed and based on. It's a very unique approach, and it's just kind of coupled with this genuinely effective and just unsettling story. And I feel that it has really cemented its place, just as a cult classic at this point. And for me, like I said, it's a standout in the Halloween saga. It's my absolute favorite Halloween film in the entire franchise. And I think that this film is a testament just to the fact that sometimes, the greatest scares can come from the unexpected. But now we move back on to bringing Michael Myers back to the franchise with Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers from 1988. So, like I said, after the unexpected detour with Season of the Witch, the franchise's producers, they decided to bring back their iconic killer with Michael Myers. And Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, you know, like I said, it marked the return of him, and with him, just the birth of what is now known, as the Thorn timeline. And this Halloween film was directed by Dwight H. Little, and this film attempts to recapture, the spirit of the original while kind of introducing a a new generation of potential victims, and and a new central figure for Michael to stalk. So the premise here is very simple. Michael Myers has been in this kind of comatose state for, I think it's like 10 years or whatever, since the whole Haddonfield Memorial Hospital Inferno in Halloween 2. And his transfer back to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, awakens him upon hearing that Laurie Strode has died, in a car accident. And she has left behind a daughter, Jamie Lloyd, played with just remarkable, maturity by Danielle Harris, even at such a young age. Danielle Harris did a phenomenal job as Jamie in Halloween 4. But, Michael, seemingly resurrected by this inexplicable force, immediately sets his sights on Haddonfield and his niece, Jamie. So George P. Wilbur takes on the role of Michael in Halloween 4. And while he kind of lacks some of the subtle, menace of Nick Castle or Dick Warlock, he really brings this brute force and just this implausibly resonant, physicality to the character. And the film does a decent job, of reestablishing Michael as this relentless, unstoppable force, and it really utilizes this more traditional slasher approach than the original does, kind of. So the kills here are just gruesome and creative, and just the film embraces that inherent chaos, of Michael's rampage through the town. And of course, Donald Pleasance returns as Dr. Loomis. And my son, actually, a few years ago at Horror Hound, he dressed up as Dr. Loomis, and everyone was calling him Little Loomis. And he got involved with the kids costume contest at the convention, and which he ended up winning. He got first place. He got like the prize bag and got a trophy of like it's like Freddy Krueger's glove on the trophy. Is really cool because Robert Englund was actually there at the convention as a guest, and as we were staying in the same hotel as he was, so we came up the stairs, and he was like getting off the elevator as we was going down this hall, and he just stopped and he seen my son dressed as Dr. Loomis, and he was like, "Oh wow!" He was really impressed with Noah's costume, and the reason I bring that up is because Noah dressed up as the Halloween 4 version of Dr. Loomis for that convention, where he had like the scarred face and everything, and he even did like the limp, and it was so cool. Everyone loved it. One of the best memories of my life, honestly. The proudest I'd ever been of him. I mean, when he got up there on stage and he was just reciting all these lines that he had practiced as Dr. Loomis. I mean, you guys just had to be in there. You had to be in there to understand how awesome it was. Like, 'cause it wasn't just me and Candace, there, and my brother-in-law CJ, he was there as well. It wasn't just us, like the overwhelming feeling that we had because we were so proud of him and we're his family, but just like realizing all these people in there, like sitting watching him on stage, were cheering for him and like yelling and just like, I'm like, what is even happening around? This is unreal. And sorry, I got off the beaten path there, but I wanted to talk about that because, like I said, it's one of the proudest moments I've ever had in my life of being a dad, and just knowing that my son is really incorporating all these things that I love into his own life. Um, so and just it was just a really, like I said, one of the greatest moments of my life. But anyway, getting back to the movie of Halloween 4, like I said, Donald Pleasance just does an amazing job in this, and like his desperation, in this film is now just amplified, by his knowledge of Michael's seemingly, unkillable nature and just his guilt, over his past actions. Um, and Dr. Loomis's pursuit of Michael in this is more frantic and personal, as he's desperately, trying to protect Jamie, who just exhibits this very disturbing, psychic connection to her uncle. And like I said, Danielle Harris is just a revelation as Jamie Lloyd, and she really injects, this film with that much needed emotional depth and fear. And her performance, it often just carries the weight of the film as the audience experiences the terror kind of through her eyes. And while Halloween 4 just it successfully brings back Michael, and introduces this compelling new, hero like character in Jamie, it also begins to kind of tread familiar ground as well. And that reliance on jump scares and kind of somewhat predictable plot points, can make it feel less original than the first film. But however, I think this film's strengths really lie in its embrace, of the core elements that really made the original Halloween so effective. That unstoppable killer, the desperate pursuit, just, and that kind of that sense of dread that really permeates Haddonfield. And the ending here with this film, with Michael falling down the mine shaft, it again suggests this kind of, finality that the franchise, would of course, ignore. And Halloween 4 is just a solid entry that, revitalizes, the series by bringing back its most terrifying asset in Michael Myers. And, also you got to talk about that ending with, that connection with Jamie. It finally start to kind of take over her a bit, as, on Halloween night and when they're about to go trick or treating, she's in her clown outfit and everything. And she, has that evil that's kind of transferring into her from Michael, and she picks up the pair of scissors and stabs her stepmother, as and then we're left with that image of her at the top of the stairs, and then you have Loomis and the family down at the bottom of the stairs, and Loomis just screaming, no, no, no. And it's just I think it's one of the greatest endings in all of the Halloween franchise. I absolutely love it. It's just the imagery of it all is just outstanding. But moving on to the next film, so let's to further the psychic connection with Jamie and Michael. Let's talk about Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers from 1989, and this follows directly on the heels of Halloween 4. And it dives deeper into the kind of convoluted lore of the Thorn timeline. This one was directed by Dominic Girard, and this installment attempts to build upon that psychic connection between Michael and Jamie Lloyd, while also introducing this kind of new enigmatic, I guess, villain, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But this film picks up a year after the events of Halloween 4, with Michael surviving the fall down the mine shaft, and he's being nursed back to health by this hermit. And that psychic link between Michael and Jamie is further explored here, with Jamie experiencing these visions of Michael's actions, and his intended victims. And this element, while intended to add a new dimension, can sometimes feel a bit overused, kind of bordering on a lot of repetition with it. But Michael, now with this kind of a more menacing, slightly more theatrical mask. That's the nicest way I can put it. Because this is one of my least favorite masks in the entire franchise used here. This is actually one of my least favorite films in the Halloween franchise. But I still do watch it. If it's on TV or if I'm doing a Halloween marathon, I always got to include Halloween 5. But like with talking about the mask though, it's more of a, I don't know, like I don't really care for the look of it. But anyway, Michael, he's continuing his hunt for Jamie here, who is, she's now in this children's mental health clinic, and Dr. Loomis, he's still obsessed with stopping Michael. He begins to use Jamie as kind of bait to lure and capture Michael, because he knows of that psychic connection that Jamie has with Michael. So the film's pacing can be a little uneven, with the moments of genuine tension, interspersed with scenes that feel a bit drawn out, and the kills, while still violent, don't always carry the same impact as in previous installments. And I think the most intriguing aspect of Halloween 5 is just that introduction of, this new villain that they're introducing as part of the Thorn timeline, with the Man in Black, who is this shadowy figure who just seems to be pulling, Michael's strings and protecting him. And this mystery really adds a layer of intrigue, and just, it hints at this larger conspiracy that's at play. And the film's ending with the Man in Black breaking Michael out of jail, and there's a lot of and that's one of the things about this film, why it's one of my least favorites of the franchise, is there's some silly stuff in it. Let's be honest. Like, let's look at the two cops. When they first, at the beginning of the film, when they're they when Loomis calls Rachel to see what's going on with Max while he's barking stuff, because they're they think that Michael is there. And then so the police come, and there's like these two goofy cops, and they're playing like these like clown sounds or whatever when they're on screen. And I'm like, what? That's so weird. But and then there's also like that aspect of when Michael gets put in jail and he's inside the jail cell still wearing the mask. I'm like, why would they not take the mask off of him? But it's just I always get a huge laugh out of that every time when I watch the film, and I just see that shot of Michael just sitting in the jail cell. But like I said, with the Man in Black breaking Michael out of jail, it leaves the audience with more questions than answers. And it really sets up that next chapter in the Thorn timeline. And while Halloween 5, definitely has its moments as well. I won't put it down completely because it does have some pretty cool moments. Particularly in just exploring that psychological toll, on Jamie, and just that growing mystery surrounding Michael. It ultimately feels like a transitional film. You know what I mean? It's hampered by by some convoluted plot devices and just a slightly less focused story than than Halloween 4. However, that continued presence of just Donald Pleasance and Danielle Harris, returning from Halloween 4 now into this film, just a lot. And even, like I can't think of her name right now. Ellie Cornell, I think is her name, that played Rachel. Even in her kind of short, lived character in Halloween 5, because where she was killed off by Michael. Just it was nice seeing her return to the franchise as well in this one. And then all of that, along with just the introduction of that intriguing Man in Black, it really keeps the franchise alive and kicking. And just, although with a slightly less impactful stride, I have to say. But now that leads me to the next film, and that is Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers from 1995. So there was a big gap in between this and Halloween 5, because, like I said, Halloween 5 came out in 1989, and so it was 6 years later when the next film, Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers, came out. And I think this film is arguably the most ambitious, and in my opinion, the most kind of perplexing film in the Thorn timeline. So this was directed by Joe Chappelle, and this installment attempts to just provide concrete explanations for Michael's supernatural resilience and just his murderous obsession. And this is also I think Paul Rudd's film debut. So it's really cool. If you're a Paul Rudd fan like I am, I mean, it's just really cool to know that his beginnings in his film career was with the Halloween film. So in just all of this, just really in delving into that cult driven conspiracy really makes this film so compelling. And like I said, this film picks up 6 years after the events of Halloween 5. And now Jamie, now a teenager, played by JC Brandy. And there's some stuff I won't get too much into about that. But Danielle Harris, I think, was originally offered the role of Jamie in this film, but I think there was a money issue or something. They didn't offer her enough, or what they did offer her was very insulting. I can't remember exactly the details on that, but they went with JC Brandy to play the role, and it is a short-lived role as part of the film. So Jamie's character doesn't play a huge part in this one. And Jamie, like I said, has in the story being told here, she's escaped captivity from the Man in Black, and she's bearing a child. and Michael, who's still driven by his curse and just the cult's influence, he pursues Jamie, and it leads to this brutal chase and Jamie's tragic death. And I think that might have been another thing too. I don't think that Danielle Harris really liked the idea that they were going to kill Jamie off, so that might have something to do with it too. But anyway, so the baby here, Jamie's baby, is rescued by Tommy Doyle, who's played by Paul Rudd. And and Tommy was the boy that Laurie Strode babysat in the original film, and he has now become obsessed with this legend of Michael Myers, and just the central revelation of the curse of Michael Myers, like I said, is that curse of Thorn. This ancient Celtic curse that we are told, which is really cool because they bring the Celtic connection back into it, like that they used in Halloween 3. So I think that's why I appreciate this one so much. And with, like I said, that Celtic curse, it forces the chosen individual to kill their entire family just to prevent this catastrophic plague, from befalling humanity. And Michael is revealed to be that chosen individual, and so it explains his evil and what he does. And it's all manipulated by this cult of druids residing in this the abandoned Smith's Grove Sanitarium. And the Man in Black is unveiled as Dr. Terrence Wynn, who's played by Mitchell Ryan here, and he's a former colleague of Dr. Sam Loomis, and he's a key figure in this cult. So this explanation, while attempting to provide a definitive reason for Michael's actions, it kind of feels like this unnecessary overcomplication of what made the original so effective. The within the original, the ambiguity of Michael's evil was a significant part of his terror. In reducing him to a pawn of a supernatural curse kind of diminishes that. However, though, the film does offer some genuinely, disturbing moments, particularly, Jamie's final moments and, the cult's, unsealing rituals. So overall, like I said, I really do like this film a lot, even though I may not agree with kind of like where they took what was originally supposed to be the premise for Michael's character and changed it into something completely different. I still think it's interesting and it's very entertaining to me. So, I can't complain too much. But, Paul Rudd, he delivers this kind of surprisingly strong performance as this grown-up Tommy Doyle, just with writing with this kind of sense of, fear and determination. And then you have Marianne Hagen as Kara Strode, who was Laurie's adoptive cousin. She also really provides this capable, presence as the film's kind of primary female protagonist. And then, of course, again, Donald Pleasance, this would be his final on-screen appearance as Dr. Loomis. He brings this weariness to his role. His character having witnessed just the full, tragic arc of Michael's existence. So with all these people from Laurie to Jamie to everybody in the middle there that had been victims of Michael's rampage over the years, Dr. Loomis still stands as a huge presence in that story. And it's so good to see like some closure with that character in this film, because this was shortly before Donald Pleasance had passed away. So just really glad we got a little bit of closure with that character in this story of the Halloween franchise. But The Curse of Michael Myers is just a film. At times it feels like it tries too hard to explain the unexplainable. You know what I mean? Like the lore surrounding the Curse of Thorn feels a little tacked on, and it kind of detracts from the straightforward terror of Michael himself. But at the same time, I still enjoy it. I'm still entertained by it. I find it to be incredibly interesting. I can't lie. It definitely offers some interesting performances, and some very few unsettling sequences throughout the film. But it just you know for a lot of people, it's still not one of my favorites of the franchise. I think a lot of people feel that same way. There are things about it that feel convoluted and feel a little bit disappointing. But at the same time, like, I'm on the fence about it too, because there are a lot of things I like about it as well. So, I mean, this is just one of those Halloween films in the franchise that kind of sits in almost like a limbo. So I really don't know where I would place it as far as if I were ranking the Halloween films, but it might be somewhere in the middle or something. Um, I definitely like this one more than I like Halloween 5 and like Halloween Resurrection and some of the Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 and some other of the Halloween films. But yeah, I mean, with this one, it probably sits where I'm somewhere in the middle on this one, because, like I said, there are things about it that bother me, but at the same time, there are a lot of things that I like about it as well. Um, but with the ending of this movie, with Michael being subdued by Tommy, it feels more like a procedural ending than like this kind of cathartic release of terror. So yeah, this is definitely a weird one, and but weird is not always a bad thing. Weird can be good as well. So, but yeah, this is one that I'll watch. Always when I'm doing a Halloween movie marathon. Um, I'll watch it if it's on TV or whatever, or just in passing. So definitely, yeah, check out Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers if you haven't. But that now leads me to a new beginning with the franchise with Halloween H2O 20 years later from 1998. So after the missteps of the Thorn timeline, the Halloween franchise took a much needed break, before reinventing itself with Halloween H2O 20 years later, which becomes a completely different timeline from the Thorn timeline. So Halloween H2O is supposed to be the next in the timeline after Halloween 2 from 1981. So everything that happened, with Halloween 4 and 5 and 6 doesn't exist in this universe with H2O. Um, this one was directed by Steve Miner. And this film just bravely decided, to ignore, like I said, all those sequels post Halloween 2, and just essentially, create this new continuity that just directly follows the events of those first two films. So this kind of reboot cool, or whatever you want to call it, was really kind of a masterstroke, allowing the franchise to return to its roots, while introducing this new generation of scares. And the premise is simple here as well. So 20 years after the Haddonfield massacre, Laurie Strode, again played by Jamie Lee Curtis, just returning with this intensity in the character, has faked her own death to escape Michael Myers. And now living under the alias Carrie Tate, she is the head mistress of this boarding school, which is, and this is a life that she's built, on fear and constant vigilance. And then her son John, who's played by Josh Hartnett here, him and his friends are unaware of her past, until Michael, who has been missing since that hospital explosion back in Halloween 2, reappears. And H2O excels in its atmosphere and in its commitment to just recapturing that suspenseful dread of the original. And the film wisely focuses on Laurie's psychological trauma and just her desperate fight for survival against the brother that she thought she'd left behind. And Jamie Lee Curtis once again is just phenomenal in this. Her performance is just a powerful blend of just fear and resilience and just that maternal instinct. So her journey from a victim to a warrior is just incredibly compelling. And, Michael Myers here, portrayed by Chris Durand, is once again a huge threat. Um, while the film doesn't delve into any like convoluted lore, it emphasizes Michael's relentless pursuit and just his that terrifying physicality about him. Um, the kills are well executed and brutal, and just the film effectively uses the boarding school setting for this series of just suspenseful sequences throughout the film. And the film also benefits from a very strong supporting cast, including Michelle Williams and Adam Han Bird. Who you may know Michelle if you're a Dawson's Creek fan. She was on that show, and I think in her personal life, she was the girlfriend of Heath Ledger for a bit. I think they ended up having a child together. So like that's what I know most about her. Then Adam Hanbird, like I recognize him as the young Alan Parrish from the original Jumanji starring Robin Williams. So seeing those people in a Halloween film is super cool and funny to me. And they play Michelle plays John's girlfriend, and Adam plays John's friend in the film. And they become caught in Michael's crosshairs as well. And Josh Hartnett, though, he provides a solid anchor as Laurie's son in this, just experiencing the terror of his mother's past firsthand. And H2O, it culminates in this kind of thrilling and satisfying showdown, between Laurie and Michael. And when Laurie finally decapitates Michael at the end with his fire axe, it feels like just a cathartic release for both the character and the audience. That it's finally over. She's finally ended this with him. It is a moment that for many fans really provided a much needed sense of closure to the saga, to the franchise. And then Halloween H2O is just a strong reminder of what makes the Halloween franchise so enduringly popular. You have this terrifying villain, this iconic heroine in Jane or in Laurie Strode, and just a chillingly effective atmosphere. But as we all know in this world, money talks. So that brought us to Halloween Resurrection in 2002. And sadly, the triumphant return of Laurie Strode in H2O was short lived, as Halloween Resurrection proved to be one of the franchise's most universally panned entries. So Rick Rosenthal, who directed Halloween 2, returns to the franchise, and this sequel immediately undoes the satisfying conclusion of H2O and just plunges the series back into this kind of questionable plot choices and this frantic, almost desperate attempt to stay relevant. So the film picks up 3 years after H2O and reveals that the paramedic Laurie killed was not Michael, um, but a man whose vocal cords that Michael had crushed. And Michael, having escaped, returns to Haddonfield, and in this kind of baffling turn of events, murders Laurie early in the film. Yeah. So this decision was met with kind of widespread outcry from fans, me being one of them, as it just, effectively invalidated that hard-won victory, in H2O. Um, so the rest of the film after Laurie's death centers on this group of college students participating in this internet reality show, Dangertainment, ran by Busta Rhymes. So, and this was filmed inside Michael's childhood home. So this premise feels like a desperate attempt to kind of tap into that burgeoning reality TV craze of the early 2000s, and it ultimately just falls flat. I'm not gonna lie. So the characters are in here are largely forgettable. And they serve as little more than fodder for Michael's increasingly predictable kills. Um, and in this, Michael Myers, portrayed by Brad Lorre, is presented as a more agile and surprisingly athletic killer, which is a departure from his usual kind of lumbering menace. Um, and while this might have been an attempt to update the character, it often feels out of place and less terrifying. Um, the kills, while there is plenty of kills, they really lack just that visceral impact and suspense that was found in the earlier films. Um, and just the film also makes this kind of frustrating error in judgment by bringing, by mentioning, Dr. Loomis's, character without explaining, his fate, after Halloween 2. So while, Don Pleasance had passed away before the making of this film, his likeness is used in this kind of disturbing and, I think, disrespectful manner, just kind of further highlighting the film's, you know, narrative shortcomings. So that was really one of the things that kind of pissed me off about this film. But the only vaguely redeeming element, of Resurrection has to be that presence of Busta Rhymes as Freddie Harris, who like I said, he's the creator of the reality show Dangertainment. Uh, Busta Rhymes, he just has this very over the top performance in this, and it really injects this kind of much needed, although bizarre, energy into the film. And just his confrontation with Michael at the end, while it is nonsensical, it's at least somewhat entertaining. The whole trick or treat, motherfucker. You know, I love that, and he's doing like the friggin' karate moves and stuff on Michael Myers. It's just hilarious. So Halloween Resurrection is just a prime example of a franchise losing its way. It ignores, that established lore, dispatches with its kind of most beloved character, prematurely. And, by killing off Laurie, like way at the beginning of the film, way too early, in my opinion. And it just relies on this kind of tired and dated, premise, and then the ending with Michael awakening in the morgue, it just really feels like a pathetic attempt, to set up this continuation that thankfully would take several years to materialize. So that was basically the ending of that timeline. And then, years later, we would get starting in, I think it was 2007, they would bring back the Halloween films with the remake with Rob Zombie's Halloween. And, then his Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And then we would get the next series of films, which I believe 2018, where they would bring back Jamie Lee Curtis, and John Carpenter was even involved. And then you got Nick Castle coming back as Michael Myers. Well, just the unmasked Michael Myers when they showed him um, in the asylum. So, and while I'm not talking about those films, I did just want to mention them, as they are a part of this huger franchise than the films that we're just talking about tonight. But, like I said, with Halloween Resurrection, it's the film that just prioritizes that, in shock value and that trend chasing over genuine horror and narrative coherence. So that's the films I'm talking about tonight. But before I end the show, I want to talk about, I want to end on a positive note by talking about the legacy and just that unwavering impact of this franchise between 1978 and 2002. Despite the unevenness of the sequels, the Halloween franchise, particularly its foundational films, has left, an undeniable and just lasting legacy. The original Halloween didn't just birth, a franchise. It like codified the slasher genre. Its emphasis on suspense and atmospheric dread and just a relentless masked killer, influenced countless films that followed. And, John Carpenter's score remains one of the most iconic pieces of horror music of all time. Just instantly recognizable, guaranteed to send shivers down anyone's spine. I feel just the character of Michael Myers. I mean, where do I even begin with this? So, like, he has become this cultural icon, just a symbol of just pure, unadulterated evil that transcends the screen, and Laurie Strode as the ultimate, final girl has also become like this feminist icon in horror. Her resilience and just courage resonating with audiences for decades. And the franchise with its multiple timelines and reboots has just become this really fascinating case study in how horror can evolve and adapt, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. you know it's a testament to its enduring appeal that despite the narrative tangles that critical reception of many of its entries, the desire to return to Haddonfield and face Michael Myers never truly goes away. And my personal journey, through the Halloween franchise, with these in particular, just from the simplicity of 1978 to the narratively convoluted landscapes that followed, it really overall has been a rewarding one. Like I said, this is one of my favorite horror franchises of all time. The original film is one of my favorite horror films of all time. The original it remains to this day, you know, close to 50 years later, it remains a masterpiece. Just a benchmark for suspenseful horror. And, Halloween 2 offered just a compelling, although bloodier, expansion of Michael's reign of terror. And my favorite, of course, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, just stands apart with that unique vision and just terrifying, premise that's really just earned a special place in my heart. And even with the Thorn timeline, as convoluted as it is, it's very ambitious, but it has this ultimately flawed attempt to explain, Michael's curse. Offers this more kind of challenging viewing experience, yet still holds a lot of moments of just undeniable horror and introduces that compelling character of Jamie Lloyd. Halloween H2O just proved that the franchise could still deliver, when it returned to its core strengths, offering a very satisfying, continuation for Laurie Strode. And, even with Halloween Resurrection and its just sheer audacity and misguided ambition, um, it still serves as a cautionary tale, and just a reminder of, the franchise's potential pitfalls. But, the Halloween franchise in its entirety is just, it's a testament to that enduring power of a simple, terrifying premise. It's a saga of a boogeyman who refuses to die, a final girl who refuses to surrender, and just a legacy that continues to haunt, the imaginations of horror fans almost 50 years later. And for me, these films, with all their triumphs and missteps, just represent a very significant part of my cinematic journey, not just in the horror genre, but just in films overall. Um, and it's a descent into madness of Haddonfield that I'm always willing to revisit. So this was a big one for me. I've watched a lot of movies this year, in the 500 movies in 2025. But this talking about these movies from the Halloween franchise, it's one of the ones that I've looked forward to the most. And I love Halloween, the holiday, just the whole spirit of Halloween. and I love everything about it. And I definitely just wanted to, you know, these were an obvious choice of films to talk about when I had this planned for, talking about all these Halloween themed movies for the month of October, now into November. So, and I still do, even after the Halloween movies that I talked about tonight. I still have one more episode that I'm going to do for you guys tomorrow night with the three last movies to round out the Halloween Hoedown. So stay tuned for that. If you guys want to check that out, like I said, that will be tomorrow night. But just to end this out, with the Halloween franchise, like I said, this is a franchise I'm always willing to revisit, and the mask may change, the movies, stories may change, and the timelines may diverge. But, on Halloween night, the fear of Michael Myers and even the Silver Shamrock guys will always be there. But guys, I guess that is it for tonight. I want to thank everyone who watched this live or was here in the chat, or if you're watching this on replay, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you more than you know. Please drop me a comment below on what your favorite Halloween film is, what your favorite look of Michael Myers is, what your favorite character aside from Michael Myers in the franchise is, or just anything that you want to tell me about that you grew up loving about the Halloween franchise. I would love to see your guys' comments. I'd love to converse with you more on this subject. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that more than you guys know. So definitely just give that a like if you don't care. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button to catch more videos like from me like this one. And as always, click that bell for any future notifications. But with all that said, guys, I'm Crater. This is CraterMania. I love you guys. Have a good night.